Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Galactic Lounge Live, the first ever program of the Galactic Lounge Live. I'm really excited. Oops, I think I wet my trousers. No, I'm only kidding.
Nice. It's going to be an
But no,
exciting time, Michael.
exactly. I am really excited about this. This is something I've wanted to do for a while. Is to have like a little call-in show, and I was going, how can you really do that? And I found a really wonderful tool to do that with. And what I'm going to do in the future is I'm going to bring on, pretty much every couple of weeks, some guests for everybody to watch. This first edition of it, though, Dustin is going to act as the guest host. So I'm just going to turn over the hosting to him. I want to say things to people, first of all. When you're watching this live, it may seem a little bit pixelated. It's going to appear better later on the, when I post it to YouTube, etc. But, just understand that that's why the quality is the way that it is, because we're streaming this live. So.
Thankfully, I've got a little presentation with some pictures, and the pictures might appear a little bit blurry live, but we're going to be talking about the pictures anyway.
Yeah.
So for
and this will be
watching,
on YouTube later too. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this with me. And hello, everybody. My name is Dustin Cormier, and I'm very excited to be on the Pulse of the Universe with Michael Reed. It's an exciting time. Okay, so Michael, I thought that I would just start going through. For everybody watching, my name is Dustin Cormier. I have my own show called How to Rock Astrology. Michael's been nice enough to let me on here. Today, we're going to be discussing in particular the Shastiamsha chart. Now, many of you, this is a primarily Vedic audience, I imagine, and so Vedic astrologers will recognize what we call the Vargas. It's also known as the divisional charts of Vedic astrology. Essentially, these are considered to be almost like a harmonic chart. Really, there's many of these different harmonic charts that resonate from the degrees of each of the planets in the birth chart, what we call the Rashi chart. So this might be old news to a lot of you. For example, the Navamsha. Many of you have probably heard of the Navamsha chart. The Navamsha is considered one of these divisions, and it's one of the important ones. Now, often as an astrologer, the Navamsha chart is one that basically everybody uses. Varga chart in particular that I've found has a lot of very interesting data is called the Shastiamsha. It is the D60 chart, and we get it by taking each of the degrees of a sign, where every half of a degree, your planet will be in a new sign in the Shastiamsha chart. So this being the case, you have to be careful when you're using the Shastiamsha chart, because you need to have the birth time pretty well considered. I actually got onto this Shastiamsha chart through you, Michael. You showed it to me, and I've been using it ever since. One of the gifts that you've given me. So it's an incredible thing to use. Just anybody who's watching, I'm going to show this in my slide, that you got to keep in mind that all the fast-moving planets, if you don't have the time as precise as you can, some of the faster-moving planets might be harder to see in the Shastiamsha chart.
It's mainly the moon. It's mainly the moon you have to worry about. Everything else you can always, what you can do, just so everybody knows, is if you look at the degree you have a planet in, if it's kind of in between, let's say you have something that is going to be at 1 degree 15 minutes, right? And it's a slower moving planet, you're probably okay. Right? It's when it's close to that 29 or the 0 with the minutes part of it. But generally you find, unless it's the moon, you're probably okay, unless you are wildly uncertain about your birth time. It's houses you want to be more careful with too.
Certainly, because the houses change very quickly. So really, I would say for the audience again, that as astrologers, it's not often that we get to be blessed with a chart that has had a birth rectification. If you're working with a chart whom you know the person has rectified the chart and made sure that they know the exact birth time, the astrological birth time of the person, if you have a rectification, then you can use the houses and the house cusps even in the Shastiamsha chart. But if it's not precisely rectified in some sort of way, you might not want to use the house cusps at all, or the moon, like we've been saying. Now, the last note I want to say here in regards to all this is just for an example. You mentioned your technique, Michael, of seeing when a planet is, for example, let's say this Venus right here in this chart. We'll notice that it's at 12 degrees and 59 minutes of arc.
Yeah.
That is a Venus that is right on that cusp, which
Correct.
means that when we look in the D60 chart, as I've got in the bottom right here, I don't know if you can see it in this example, but I wouldn't use this Venus. Now, you can also see, I'm just going to do one thing here quickly, just so we can for sure see. This is the same D60 chart. You'll notice this Venus in the D60 chart, it's at 29 degrees of the D60. That means it's way on the end cusp. So for faster moving planets like Venus, you could also look on the D60 chart and see if it's within 20 degrees of the D60 placement. That's when you're going to want to be careful and just consider that it might not be quite exactly correct. Now, with all this being said, let's talk a little bit about what we expect from the D60 chart. So the last thing I want to say in this regard is, again, for those watching, I often use the D60 chart, and I will use it keeping a particular eye on the slow-moving planets. It's very easy to look at, for example, Jupiter, Saturn, the outer planets, and in particular, what you taught me, Michael, that was a very useful technique, is using Rahu and Ketu in the D60 chart.
Yeah.
Because they are pretty slow-moving, and they, really, you can have a birth time within about 15 minutes sometimes, 10 to 15 minutes of accuracy, and you should still be able to use Rahu and Ketu, again, so long as they're not on the cusp of Shastiamsha point.
Correct.
Even if they are, and you don't know for sure a person's born in 10 minutes, then keep it in mind that you might not be able to use it.
Another thing you can do is, although you cannot really use houses in the Shastiamsha chart unless you've got a rectified birth time, is you can make, if you're wanting to understand a little bit more about, let's say the past lifetime for the individual as it's shown in the Shastiamsha chart, you can make Ketu the ascendant.
Right.
And you can just read from there. And Rahu the ascendant, and you can read from there too.
Certainly. And there's going to be incredible things that, that's something that I'd like to quiz you a little bit about, Michael, because you've talked about that. So for now, let's get a little bit of background on what exactly the Shastiamsha chart is. Now, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to bring up a little bunch of a presentation. Now, can you see this presentation okay here, Michael?
Yeah, definitely.
Perfect. Alrighty. Now, as I'm going through, Michael or anybody else, feel free to put questions in the chat box.
Everybody, just briefly, Dustin, just so people know, there is a chat window for those of you who are watching. You can type in the chat window, and we'll get the chat. And at some point, we are likely going to open things up for people to call in with their questions. Right in the middle of your screen, there should be a call-in button, and when it's time, we'll kind of tell people that they can use that button. We'll see it on this end, and we'll prompt you. You can activate your video as well as your audio, just so you know. Perfect. But if you are wanting to respond by chat to something, there's a little chat window over to the side, which you should see.
Yep. And we're interested in both. It'd be lovely if anybody wants to join us on screen. But if you don't feel like it, feel free to just ask us questions, and we'll answer them in the chat box. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we're looking at is the yoga of past lives and the present. Now, me and Michael had a little chat beforehand, and we talked about how the Shastiamsha chart has been considered and known to resonate with what we call past lives. And Michael made the important point of saying that we experience in our present life everything that's in the Shastiamsha chart. It's right there because, of course, we are the living echo of what has been. Therefore, what has been is right in front of us in our lives and in our present experience. So when we talk about the D60, we don't necessarily want to throw it away as something that has happened and is now not relevant to us. I almost like to think of it as another layer of the shale of the present experience, because our present experience has many layers. That's part of what the Vargas are trying to tell us. So what is so significant about this particular layer of the D60? This little slide is just telling us, like I said, you don't need to know your exact birth time to make use of the techniques that we talk about. You just need to know the planets and the signs of the D60, which needs at least 10 minutes to 15 usually, 10 to 15 minutes of accuracy. So this is just essentially saying what we've already been said. Now, this is my first slide here, and this is just showing Brihat Parashara Horashastra, particularly in chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Parashara lists the 16 important Vargas, which we call Shodasha Varga, and Shodasha means 16. So there's these primary 16 Vargas. Now, there are actually more Vargas than this. Shodasha Varga is simply the most important ones that the ancient ones thought were the most accessible, most palatable, most grippable Varga charts for use in astrology in most cases of people. So that's why we use these 16. Now, there are many ways to group the Vargas, and I'm going to show you this here. One of the ones that Parashara talks about is grouping them into the 5 Panchatattvas. Now, of these 5 groupings, each one relates to the 5 elements that we all know. That's ether, air, fire, water, and earth. And for everybody's reference, it's interesting that there's a funny switch around that this took me a little bit of a while to understand. But essentially, as Parashara gives it, Parashara notes that the first main important charts that we all very much use and recognize, that's the D1, the D2, the D3, the D4, the D7, the D9, the D10, and the D12. These correspond to the Akash ether element. Now, I'd just like to say a quick, before we start really getting into this, I think it's relevant to consider that as a person who, often astrologers try to look at the ground up when it comes to a person's experience. I thought the D1 and the D2 and the D3, I thought the Rashi chart would have been the earth element, because that's the Rashi chart is our incarnated things that we can deal with. And it's interesting that Parashara tells us that these are actually considered the ether. And it really, for me, in my brain, what is kind of being conveyed here is that the first 7 the first Vargas, D1, D2, D3, etc., they are the Indriyas. The ether element relates to the Indriyas. And this relates to our senses, rather our internalized senses. And in a way, it's the karma of the astral spheres that we experience in these first Vargas. Whereas the D60 chart is considered the earth element. It's almost as if what has happened in the past is the earth that we can't change. But the ether of the life that we're presently living is the things that we can change. It's the karma and the immediate circumstances that have led us to our incarnation, which are actually more mystical, more mutable, and less solid than the D60 chart. It's almost as if to say as I'm going to show in one of our slides, it's considered by Parashara that the D60 shows the ceiling of things that are capable to us. Sort of like the heights.
Totality,
The totality is a good word to use there too, Michael. So there is a ceiling or a basic root of earth that is shown in the D60, and we have to abide by what's given in the D60 when we're dealing with the opportunities of the other Vargas of the D1, the D2, the D3, the D9, the Navamsha, etc. So this is an interesting philosophical aspect of all of this to grasp. Now, there are, of course, there are these other elements, but the D60, the Shastiamsha, is the only Varga that corresponds with the earth element. Now, I'm a big fan of Ernst Wilhelm, and I often quote him. Ernst Wilhelm has a great article talking about the Vargas and the Panchatattvas and exactly what we're talking about. You can look it up on Google to find it. And in this article, he notes that the reality of what each of us as individuals can manage within the limited time, energy, and resources available to us. This is what's defined in the Shastiamsha. Again, as Parashara says, it's a general indicator of karma, representing the limits of our capacity on Earth. Now, it's important for us to mention that there's another dimension of the D60 chart that's very commonly used. It's called the Shastiamsha deities. Now, I made this for an old video, and I say it's not relevant to this video. But, Michael, we can talk about it, because the Shastiamsha deities is what a lot of people think is the only useful thing in the Shastiamsha. Most people point directly to these Shastiamsha deities. Now, again, the Shastiamsha deities is something that you really need a birth rectification to be fully sure of what you're dealing with there. But essentially, in each of the Shastiamshas, in each of the signs of the D60 chart, each of them is associated with a deity. And Ernst Wilhelm, again, is right now doing a lot of digging in regards to what these deities are. There's a Vedic consciousness of the Vedic deities, which abides by a numerology that is beyond the 12-sign zodiac that we all kind of know and love.
Right.
Really, it's like an inner, deeper soul essence, whereas, that deep soul essence of the Shastiamsha deities expresses itself through the horoscope of the Rashi chart that we all know.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Michael. Do you have anything?
Oh well, I was going to say to that. Something I really. Here, I'm just going to kind of try to grab some paper over here.
Yeah.
What I really kind of like, to do for people to kind of help them to understand the Varga charts and what they're all about, is if you can take this like piece of paper as being the Rashi chart, right? The Varga charts are like layers of that, which all merge right into the Rashi chart. It's the multidimensionality, if I can say that, of who you are as an individual, right?
Certainly.
In short, if you've got something going on in the Shastiamsha, let's say one of your planets is in what's called a Sarpa Shastiamsha, which is connected to serpent energy and intense energy and everything that serpents represent, shedding of skin, transformation, things along those lines. That very same energy isn't confined to the Shastiamsha chart. It can express itself in the Rashi chart because it's a layer of who you are as an individual, and it gets expressed in the Rashi chart as well. So the Vargas are all interrelatable and interconnected on a certain level. Yeah.
Yes, and especially when things, one of my favorite words lately is, with regards to astrology, is the word confluence.
Yeah, exactly.
Confluence is a wonderful word. Yeah, big word. If you think of
important word, that's what I mean by big word. It's an important word. Yes.
Important. Yes.
Exactly.
So, when we think of something as influencing me, it means that it's an influence. It's something coming from within, or it's affecting me. Now, confluence is when many influences are related to the same archetype, shall we say. So if you have a very important planet as one of your, and it has a Sarpa deity in the D60 and the Shastiamsha deities, then that Sarpa energy, that serpentine energy, is a latent potential, and it's going to be there in everything that you do. you'll see it more if, for example, there's so many ways to tie different themes in
Like Ashleisha, if
in
the planet was
astrology.
also in Ashleisha too, then
I was totally just gonna say that, Michael. That's a
exactly.
great point. Or even
Good.
if somebody's, got the Lagna
Yeah.
in Leo and the Lagna is in Ashleisha, they're gonna have this serpentine energy on the front, and there's gonna be the Sarpa energy of the Shastiamsha deity somewhere deep in there as well. So this kind of confluence is important with all regards to astrology. But particularly when we're talking about trying to, understand an energy that we see in the D60 chart, it really needs to be correlated with experiences that the person can come to understand. So that's why when something in the D60 chart, you want to see if it relates to something in the Rashi chart, because it'll usually be something that the person can actually have an aha moment about. And those are the good aspects of healing that we want to look for. Sometimes you can't necessarily, sometimes there's no way to explain to your client what's going on other than just explaining an energy that they don't understand. That's just the nature of the educational value of astrology. There's a lot to learn. Now, going from, so the Shastiamsha deities is a relevant aspect of all of this. Aside from the Shastiamsha deities, ultimately the D60 is what I'm considering in some ways to be a deep spine of the birth chart. It's kind of in my own words. It's a deep spine from which the other limbs branch out. Now, mind you, this is like a spine that, some people can't really get in touch with their spine. I mean, everybody can get in touch with their spine, really, but not everybody in their lives considers it important to be have the anatomy or to care about what's going on in their spine. They just deal with it, what's in their life, and that's it. But if you do choose to tune into what's in the D60 chart, you will find that it's a deeply laid element that you kind of can't really transform. We have to transform our attitude towards what's being given there, because it's going to represent an energy. And energy is not necessarily something that you can throw away. Rather, you have to transmute it into the most positive way of expressing it that your Rashi chart allows for. Now, this is the diagram that I'm looking to show here. Essentially, as we said, the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The first 8 Vargas are considered to be the ether, the Akash. They're very. We know the ether is a very subtle element, and it's the indriyas of what is being given to us in this moment. Now, the air Shastiamshas are very interesting because there is, Ernst Wilhelm talks about how the air Panchatattva is something that's very mutable. I'd like to explore that more, and that might be something that you and I can talk about later, Michael. But for now, it's important for us to show that while all of these other Vargas tend to have 3 or 2 Vargas within it, the Shastiamsha stands alone as being the only earth element Panchatattva. Now, another clue to the Shastiamsha is I want us to consider that in Shadbala is really has to do with, again, like the nature of a planet as it is on Earth. And when we do Shadbala, we use what's called the Sapta Vargas. The Sapta Vargas is 7 Vargas. And this goes to say that while we have the 16 Vargas here, there are different astrological techniques will pick from different of these groups for different purposes. Sapta Vargas we use in Shadbala. Dasha Varga, for example, is using only 10. And when we use a technique called Dasha Varga, we pick 10 of these 16 Vargas, and it gives us, we can see it here. Dasha Varga is the 3rd in this row. We're picking 10 from this 16, and these 10 Vargas relate somehow to our action in life and our career. Of course, there's 10 of them, and it resonates with 10. with the dasha, with the samsha, etc. We know that the 10th house resonates with action, and it resonates with our career and what we do with our action. So this goes to say that where Dasha Varga uses 10, Sapta Varga uses 7. And it's interesting to me that the Sapta Varga is used in Shadbala. And Shastiamsha is not a part of Sapta Varga. The reason I'm saying this is because the Shastiamsha is not in, it's not really conveyed in Shadbala like these other Vargas are. And this is because the Shastiamsha is not an etheric influencer of the present incarnation. Shadbala is really has more to do with direct involvement of the planet in our present incarnation. So that is to say that this is just showing how we can pick and, cherry pick from the different Vargas and get different information. Now, when we calculate strength through all 16, this is what Shodasha, when we use all 16 of these charts, as we can see in Shodasha Varga, each one of them is given a different amount of importance and strength for each planet that's in it. For example, if Mars is in the Rashi chart and it's exalted and it has great support, then it's going to get full points in the Shodasha Vargas. And it's going to give so the Rashi chart gives 3.5% influence on the totality of the Shodasha Varga. In the Hora chart, it's only got 1 point. In the Drekana, it's got 1 as well. Now, charts like the Navamsha, we can tell it's important because the Navamsha has 3 points of what we call Vimshopak strength. And so a planet in the Navamsha will be, how it presents itself in the Navamsha will have much greater influence than these other Vargas. For everybody's reference, Shodasha Varga this is what, back in the days of astrology, where if a person was possibly going to be a king, let's say a prince was born to the king, and the astrologers wanted to check whether that prince should be a king, they would check his Shodasha Varga. They would check the mathematics of all of their chart, all of their Vargas, including the Shastiamsha. And what's important to show here, this is the last kind of point I want to make in regards to this presentation. The Vimshopak scores, which is the amount of strength each planet receives from a Varga, the Vimshopak scores are almost double coming from the Shastiamsha compared to the D1 and the D9. So when back in these days, when we were deciding whether a prince would be a king or not, the Rashi charts planets would have 3.5 out of, let's say, 4. The Navamsha chart would have 3 points out of 4. And ultimately, the Shastiamsha chart had 4 points of relevant importance, meaning the planets in the Shastiamsha chart had more sway in deciding whether a person could be a king or not than the Rashi and the Navamsha chart. Now, this is something that I did want to talk about, Michael. Does this make sense the way I've conveyed it, or do you think I should clarify anything?
No, it's fine. It's fine. Is your internet connection a little bit slow on your end? We seem to have lost your video feed on this end.
I see.
It says it's still being recorded, but we're not seeing you live here.
I see. So can you see me now?
No. But
Really?
It should still be recording on your end. It's just people who are watching us live may not see it. It says cameras disabled due to slow internet connection. Video is still recorded.
You can't change devices. Well, Michael, that could very well be a thing. I'm hoping that when it comes through on YouTube that it's still
It will. It should be there. It's okay.
I think so too.
Go for it.
Well, thank you, Michael. I'm going to continue, and thank you for letting me know. Maybe in the future I'll screw around with my internet next time just to make sure that it's all good. Now, for now, I'm just about done with my presentation here. So maybe that way that'll give us a little bit more of a vocal interaction, and that's kind of helpful. The last thing I want to show here is that the Shastiamsha is of great importance. And for anybody listening, I'm showing a picture of a wheel, and the D60 is at the center of a wheel. In the same way here, we can see the D60 is this primary sort of karmic backdrop. And each incarnation, the D1 and the D2 and the D3, the D7, all of our extraneous incarnations, our extraneous charts tend to dissolve and change. My inclination is to say that the D60 remains throughout many different lifetimes. Now, this is just me sort of, and I almost want to ask you to see if this feels correct, Michael. I'm almost seeing the D60 as like a spinning top. The bottom of the spinning top is the D60, which does not change. But the present incarnation, the D1, the D2, the D3, the D9, these all spin after each incarnation. I'm a Leo rising right now. Maybe when I die and I'm born again in my next incarnation, maybe I'll have a different Lagna. Maybe I'll have a different Rashi chart. But I'm inclined to think that, for example, my Rahu in the Shastiamsha of Scorpio, I've got Rahu in Scorpio in my D60 chart. So maybe in my next incarnation, Rahu in my Rashi chart might change. But Rahu in the Shastiamsha is something that has been that way the whole time. And this goes to show the importance of understanding what is being conveyed by the Shastiamsha. It's the earth element, and it is something inside of us that has been a residue of a deep pillar of importance, which we have to alter our attitude towards and basically accept. We got to accept at some level what's given in the D60 chart in order to work with it in an honest way. I've got my kitty right now, and he is just all about saying hello to everybody right now.
That's okay. Your feed is back again. Yeah, just so you know.
Perfect. Yeah, okay. Yeah. My cat's stepping on my keyboard.
Something I really, when I try to explain the D60 chart to people, I kind of try to, just hear some thoughts. Do you mind if I kind of?
Of course.
Share some?
Michael, okay. I laid out my presentation, so I'd love to hear what you think of it, pal.
Oh, sure. Well, something that I always try to express to people, because when I use the D60 chart pretty extensively in doing something called a karmic analysis with people, I work with the nodal axis in both the D60 and in the D1 charts.
It's an
working
important
with
conversation. Yeah.
Oh, most definitely. But quite often, what I try to explain to my clients when you're going into that is you can't confirm a previous lifetime.
I agree.
Unless you have a time machine and you can journey back in time and observe yourself.
Certainly.
You can't validify it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's really less important than the story it's really trying to tell the person.
The energetic signature.
Correct. But when I will work with the D60 with them and with the D1 with them and do the karmic analysis, I convey the concept to them in the form of a past life dialogue, because you're going to understand and relate to your stuff, for lack of a better way to put it, if you're able to step outside of yourself and listen. So like hearing it in the third person becomes very helpful for the individual. But generally, even though you can say this to people at the very beginning of it, you get a few minutes in and the person will go, but wait a minute, if this is a past lifetime, I still do this.
Right.
And so I find quite often with the Shastiamsha chart and with astrology in general, people get really caught up on the past and they get really caught up on the future, obviously, because people are wanting to, get their prediction, etc. But what always gets missed is right now.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
Totally.
And so time is very non-linear. We think past, present, future. And sure, we have a past, but when are we observing the past? Right now.
Right.
When are we like being concerned about the future right now. So the
Certainly.
moment's always right now. So what's going to happen with the Shastiamsha chart is you'll have what I like to call the deeper, more recessed karmic concepts that are there for the individual. They're more recessed. It's not that they're not accessible, because the person is very aware of them once you begin to engage them in a conversation about it. They completely get it. Exactly. And but it's just something that's more deeply recessed. And I kind of, in order to make it simpler for people, when I'm doing the reading for them, I say, think of like the Rashi chart as this layer of karma. Think of the Shastiamsha chart as what's beneath that layer of it. So I always start with the Shastiamsha, and then I go into the Rashi chart, because then it begins to bring it more to the surface and helps them to understand. Like, for instance, if
That's
somebody...
a great point.
No, go for it. Thank you.
Oh, no, Michael, you're okay. You can go right
okay,
ahead. I just wanted to say that that's a good way to put it. You're building the narrative from the beginning.
Yeah. Oh, definitely, definitely. And one of the things you find in this, let's say somebody in this lifetime is going, oh, well, I'd really love to be a musician, but I have stage fright. I can't cope with it. Or I really want to help large amounts of people, but I can't handle public speaking, or any number of things like that, right? There's something that's there about putting themselves out there. Sometimes you can see something in the Shastiamsha chart, like perhaps in an earlier lifetime, the person got beat up because of doing that, or they were outspoken and they were put to death because of it. Somewhere in the psyche, there's this karmic memory of, when I expressed myself, bad doo-doo happened, right? So I really don't know if I want to do that again. And it creates that hesitancy for the individual. So one of the things that's really great is when you can get into that karmic narrative and get beneath the surface, the person goes, oh, that's why.
Right. This is the importance of cognition.
Exactly. So it rewinds them back to that moment, and they're going, okay, I can take a look at that. I can understand that. Some common things that I encounter going into this type of work with people, in addition to that, and this is more off the topic of the Shastiamsha and more on the topic of Rahu and Ketu and how they tie into the Shastiamsha, is the concept that happens with most people of going, well, how do I resolve this, or how do I make it all go away? Your nodal axis is kind of like the engine that drives your karma. It drives the karma of your whole incarnation. When you work through one layer of it, it's not going to just completely go away. It's going to take you into another layer of it, and so on and so forth. That's its work. It does that the whole time. Yeah, that you're here in the state of duality. That's what it has to do. What's really excellent about the Shastiamsha deities that I really, really like is they help to define a subtlety of the planet that the person may not have previously had a grasp on. A lot of times the way the Shastiamsha chart gets used is in a very simplistic manner by some people, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but a lot of times the only way that it's used is some Shastiamsha deities are considered to be more benefic or malefic. And so a lot of times people will simply use the Shastiamsha chart to see if a planet's going to give more of its benefic influences or more of its malefic influences. But if you can understand the symbolism, and that's all you really have to connect to, is the symbolism of the deities that are connected to it.
I do agree with that.
You can get
often find.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. One point I often like to say in this regards to the good and bad thing is that I think people don't realize that astrology is often like playing a game of poker. Yeah. And oftentimes, when you're playing poker, you don't want your first hand that you see to be your definition of how this game is supposed to play out, because there's many hands coming.
Yeah.
So when you are dealt a bad hand, if you can make glory out of a malefic placement, it's just as pertinent as failing with a good hand.
Yeah.
If you've got a good hand, you can still fail with it. Or if you've got a bad hand, you can, you bluff and you do what you got to do to turn it into a good one. Ultimately, the chance for liberation is the same.
Yeah. I often tell people, because the actual words that are related to those two concepts are somya, which means gentle, or krura, which means cruel. So the whole concept of benefic and malefic, they're not really there. You can have something positive happen to you, but in a really intense way, which is more of the cruel influence. Or you can have something horrible happen to you because you're being lazy and too luxurious and, going into too much enjoyment in your life, and suddenly you get sick from overindulgence, right?
Yes.
So
yes, absolutely.
The whole concept of good and bad, it's not really there. But for instance, going back to the Shastiamsha deities, there's a particular Shastiamsha deity called Karaladamshtra, which sometimes is translated as cleaving fang or fearfully toothed, right? And a lot of times people will go, well, what does that mean exactly? And so ways that it can play itself out, several different ways, and this is all subject to the influence of the planet and the nakshatra that it's in, houses that it's associated with, so many different things. But ways that that's played itself out. Yes, I've actually occasionally seen it where the person has bad teeth. Right. And so they have bad teeth. So I've seen that.
Yeah.
But I've also most often seen it connected to a person who is either afraid of speaking or expressing something, or they've been very outspoken and nobody else wanted to hear what they had to say because their words were too intense for other people.
Too biting for other people.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Very interesting.
So you can just quite simply, if you understand it and try to meditate upon what each of these deities relates to, you can get some really intense information. I often like to explain to people that the Shastiamsha deities, the Varga deities in general, from all the Vargas, because all the Vargas have deities connected to them, as well as the nakshatras, they're more of what I like to call the conditional element of astrology, which means they show in a very subtle manner the condition in which a planet will unfold its energy for the person.
So when you say conditional, do you mean as opposed to the figures we typically see in a regular horoscope, which are a little bit more numerologically, esoterically fixed in a way?
Whereas or Rashis, such as a Rashi will show, well, this is red or this person's tall. The Varga deities, they tend to show a little bit more of the emotional expression of the individual and the expression of the individual's will, rather than, sure, they can relate to the physical things in a person's life as well, but you get a lot more of the expression or the manner in which something plays out. Another factor like that is something called the Shayanadi Avastas, right?
Avastas?
Yeah, the Shayanadi Avastas, which there's 12 of those, and they relate to 12 different states of being waking or sleeping. One of them starts with just awakening, right?
Gotcha. Yeah.
And
so I know about the Avastas as in like Baladi Avastas, and then there's
and Jagradati,
Jagradati. Gotcha.
Check out the Shayanadi Avastas. They're really interesting too.
Very
interesting. And they're formed by a connection between the Rashis, a mathematical calculation that involves Rashis and nakshatras. So they're kind of like a bridge between Rashis, nakshatras, and planets.
Wow, very interesting. That
They're
must
pretty
be a
phenomenal.
whole world that needs to be explored for sure.
Exactly.
So
I just briefly, did you have something else you wanted to say? Because I was going to tell people here in a moment. We have a couple of people in the audience. I was going to tell them here in a moment, if they want to call in, they're welcome to do so. They can just listen if they want, but that's fine too.
I had one last point I wanted to say in regards to what we're talking about, but I think that would be a great idea.
Sure.
Generally, what I wanted to say when it comes to, we were talking about Rahu and Ketu in general, and this is a good dialogue for anybody dealing with Rahu and Ketu in general, but especially when you see what I call confluence. One of the important things with regards to the Shastiamsha is that there will sometimes be confluence with the Rashi chart and the Shastiamsha chart, or the Shastiamsha chart and the Navamsha, which I would consider another important one.
Mhm.
These three are my big three, but really confluence can happen between any two Vargas.
Exactly.
And confluence, again, means that the same archetype is being hit in the same way. Now, an example I like to give is like if we have, let's say we have Ketu and Aries in the Shastiamsha chart. That means that Rahu is in Libra. We have a person who has been dependent too much on independent action and is trying to learn the joys of letting other people help them not carry the world on their shoulders, right? That's Rahu in Libra. They want to learn how to do that, but they have always been an independent, strictly independent person. Now, let's take a person with Ketu in Aries in the Shastiamsha. And then let's say that they have Ketu with the sun in the Rashi chart. This is sticking on the same theme in a way, because the sun is ourselves, it's our individuation, it relates to the numerology of 1. So this is what we would call confluence. And in this case, it's easier for us as astrologers because we can point out into the client's experience that this is something that you've done in your past lives, which are probably at some way being blocked presently because you have Ketu with the sun. This is what we would call a confluence that is helpful. But we could also say, for example, it could be switched in a way where what is given in the Shastiamsha contradicts what is given in the Rashi chart, in which case it's just a different reading. And we have to be able to explain to the person that at some level, sometimes you're always going to have this K2 energy, let's say K2 in Aries, and you are always going to have that as a part of you. And what we want to do when we find something like this is one of my favorite phrases. This is an old Indian phrase, is that you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. When you learn that you have K2 and Aries in the Shastiamsha and that you're too independent, quote unquote, it doesn't mean you have to throw away your independence completely. You have to learn how to acknowledge this dimension of yourself and abide by it, like that train that has to move forward with that same momentum that it's always had. You don't want to throw that out. Rather, you want to integrate it. And this is why, as my final point before we ask people to come on, why I often consider that meditation, self-inquiry, and reflection of a contemplative sort is everybody's best friend for understanding how to apply anything given in astrology. Because an astrologer can tell you all these points of the past, the present, and the future. You've been this person in the past. Like we said, when somebody has this, they hear that they've been this way in the past, they think, oh, so I have to neglect that now. Now I have to completely let go of
not
that.
necessarily.
It's not necessarily the case. Really what needs to be done is astrology, again, is a useful limb of self-inquiry. But ultimately, that person will begin to acknowledge that part of themselves and how they can use it going forward if you practice some kind of meditation and self-inquiry inflection.
Yeah. I always like to say to people, the way to create the change that a person's wanting is to change your relationship to that.
Right.
And
change understanding.
That's where the change happens in the horoscope. So when you were talking earlier about the Shastiamsha and being related to the things that are more deeply recessed, it's not that we can't necessarily change them, but the way to change them is just by changing our relationship to it and going. Right. And quite often what I have found is people, this is something I'm kind of working with as my new philosophy with astrology, so to speak, which is karma isn't about, you did something horrible, now you're being, punished because of something bad you did. It's about what choices do you want to make? Are you making choices from your heart? Are you acting from the head? If you're making a choice from the heart, can you live with that choice that you made from your heart? That's kind of what we're being, in my opinion, I think that's what we're being confronted with, because generally that karmic attachment that we have is there because it's attachment. It's something we're strongly connected to. It's a pattern that can be a mental pattern, that can be an emotional pattern. But all those things are there because we haven't gotten to the point that we're able to accept some aspect of ourselves
To integrate.
that would allow us to integrate it. And so,
Right.
you can't just go, oh, well, I forgive myself for that, because that's just a mental thing. You have to work through the process. Your emotional body has to go through it. Your physical body has to go through it. But when you finally reach that point and it's done and it's resolved and it moves all of its own accord, because you've just made the decision to pay attention to it and bring it to your awareness and allow it to move, that's when that burden just goes, like,
it
off of your
starts to
shoulders.
certainly
Exactly.
and it does need to be applied, in that
Yeah,
example of someone
exactly.
with
Yeah.
that K2 in Aries in the Shastiamsha. They can learn about it and they can study it. They can study themselves into a ditch, into a corner, which is what a K2 in Aries person would do. It's not until they fully understand it, digest it within themselves, and then go and talk to people.
Yeah.
And when you talk
Something
to people, integrate the lessons that you would have learned from your astrologer in that moment. Don't just put it away and then keep doing the same thing you've been doing.
Something you were touching on earlier, which I've seen quite often happen with a lot of people, like you can present like one set of conditions in one Varga chart, and like you were saying, it contradicts with another Varga chart, and the person goes, well, which of those am I? And the answer to that is you're both of those simultaneously,
Right.
because your consciousness is very complex. Everybody's
Certainly.
is. And so, it's not that there's, like this or that, or apples or oranges. It's all of that experience together. And that's what we are. So, with astrology, you're really able to take a look at that. Shall we see if people have some questions?
Great, Michael. I think that was a good stuff. Let's see if anybody's interested in chatting with us.
Yeah, you can, if you want to chat with us and you're not like, you don't have to.
Yep.
We don't bite
Go
that
by
hard.
feel.
But what you can do is there's a button in the middle of your screen and it'll say call in, and we'll see it come up on our side. We can enable you to come on. If you are too shy to do that, or you just don't want to, or you're having a bad hair day, you can also just type, something in the chat window, and we're welcome to take a look at it. We're waiting to see if people kind of put something there, or want to connect. Is there anything else you wanted to say?
Well, that was yeah. So keep in mind, folks, if you have anything to ask, feel free to throw it in. At this point, me and Michael are just kind of like having fun and chatting.
Exactly.
Yeah. So at this point, Michael, we've really talked about a lot of the stuff that I would think to talk about in the Shastiamsha, and in a lot of ways, people have been talking about where my head goes in terms of the dialogue between one Varga and another. People have been talking about this for a long time because all the Vargas have been there, and usually it's the Navamsha and the Rashi that this
exactly, because
happens,
those are the
right?
easiest to figure out for the most part, and those are the Varga charts, I should say, that have a deeper, stronger mathematical connection on one level, and therefore a deeper, stronger energetic connection on another level. And if you don't have a super accurate birth time, in most instances your Navamsha will be on. And that's why I think it's become a thing of the Rashi and the Navamsha are the biggest ones that get used, because unless you are certain of your birth time, it's hard to really be clear on any of those other things.
Yes, I do agree with you, Michael. Although for those watching, I think an important discovery that I've made, which again, you've made so much clarity in my practice, Michael. You led
Thank
me
you.
onto
That's
this
nice to
idea.
hear.
It's so true. One of the things that I've realized is that there's a word for it. It's like Tulsi Bhava Ra. I don't know the exact word for it, but it's the conversation between the Varga and the Rashi chart by sign in a way. So this is what I mean. You did a reading for me, and we had not rectified my birth chart yet, which meant that we didn't know where the Lagna would have been held in the Shastiamsha chart. But you still did a good reading for me by talking about the sign of Rahu and Ketu in the Shastiamsha.
Exactly.
Now, how we talked about it, and this is what I've been doing in my own practice that's been very useful, is we talk about how the Rashi chart is kind of like this primary arena where karma unfolds.
Yeah.
Even the old karmas of the D60, which means, for example, I'm a Leo rising, and I have in my Rashi chart, my Rahu is in Capricorn, and that's its own thing. In my Shastiamsha chart, Rahu is in the sign of Scorpio. Now, if we take the sign of Scorpio, we can relate it to the Lagna of my Rashi chart. So that, for example, as a Leo rising, I have my D60 Rahu in my Lagna's 4th house. Right? So then my relationship with Rahu and Scorpio in the D60, I can relate it through my Lagna chart as a Leo rising. And it resonates very deeply. For example, this would go to say that I have D60 Ketu in Taurus. That is the 10th house from my Leo rising in the Rashi chart. And I deeply, when you think about it, this resonates with great importance. This is why Vargatama planets have great importance, because the planet in the Navamsha is this in the same place as it is in the Rashi chart. There's an emphasis of power there. As well, I'd also like to point out the commonly used technique called the Swamsha of the Navamsha chart. So if you look up your Atma Karaka in your Navamsha, whatever sign it will be important in the Rashi chart. As another example, I have Venus in Virgo in my Navamsha chart, and Venus is my Atma Karaka. So Virgo, no matter what chart we're talking about, is my Swamsha. And Virgo is going to be important in all of the charts. So this goes to say that the sign that a planet falls in a Varga permeates that sign and in its interactions throughout all the different Vargas. And it's an important thing to consider that when we're using the D60, we can have that conversation between points.
Oh yeah, and that's always happening inside of you. Anyway,
right.
Which is why it all makes sense. Yeah.
Right. Wonderful. Wonderful.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us today, and thank you Dustin for coming on and guest hosting for this first episode. Sounds like the cat's busy.
He is. He's tearing all my stuff in my room right now. It's okay. I love him. He's just like me.
Right. And thanks a lot, everybody, for watching. We'll assume that nobody's going to call in with any questions, and that's okay. So,
perfect. This has been a great first session, Michael.
Exactly. Yeah. And we'll talk to everybody next time. Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Michael. Oh, thanks, buddy. I was just going to say, I love being a part of anything that you do. You're a very important astrologer. You give me so much guidance in my own personal path. And for everybody watching, I'm very glad to have been a part of this with you, Michael.
Dustin, do you want to tell people about your practice and everything like that?
Thank you very kindly, Michael.
Yeah.
So for everybody watching, my name is Dustin Cormier. You can find me on YouTube as How to Rock Astrology. And as well, if anybody's interested in dropping me a line for a consultation or anything like that, you can look me up on my website, dustincormier.net/astrology. And as well, check me out on my YouTube channel. I'm doing a lot of videos just like Michael's doing. In fact, this is happening live, which makes sense that I'll be able to say this. This coming Saturday, I believe, is going to be the first of the month, where Michael and I are going to discuss the importance of having a rectified birth chart. It was an interview that I did with Michael about a month ago. That interview will be coming up onto my channel this coming Saturday for anybody who's interested.
Excellent. And for those of you who want to know where to find me, you're watching this on my channel, so you know where to find me.
Excellent.
But at the same time, if you want to schedule with me, there will be both a link for myself if you want to schedule with me, as well as a link for Dustin down in the comments section of the YouTube video when you come to watch this, everybody. And thanks a lot for watching, everybody. And we hope to see you in a couple of weeks' time. Keep an eye on my YouTube channel, my Facebook channel, and I'll put out information about when we're going to have the next guest on the show. And I'll talk to everybody next time. And thanks for joining us, everybody. Bye now.
Thanks for watching.